Hey, Waffle Gang. I do hope you are well. My name is Jimsy, and today we're checking out some more Reddit stories. If you like seeing entitled people get exactly what they deserve, you're going to love this. Let's get right into it. I'm Mark. I'm 42 years old, and my parents, in a single breath, told me I wasn't real family and uninvited me from their 40th anniversary party. A party that I was secretly paying for. Before I tell you exactly how their dream Mediterranean cruise sank before it ever left the harbor, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far a story can travel. It all started on a perfectly normal Sunday afternoon, the kind of lazy, sun-drenched day that's supposed to be peaceful. But inside my parents' living room, the peace was a thin veneer over decades of dysfunction. The air was thick with the cloying scent of my mother's potpourri and the faint, musty smell of old furniture and older resentments. I stood by the bay window, swirling the pale, bubbly liquid in my champagne flute. It was the cheap stuff, of course. My parents loved the idea of luxury far more than the actual expense, unless someone else was footing the bill. My mother, Patricia, was practically levitating. She fluttered around the room, adjusting picture frames that were already perfectly straight, her hands moving with a nervous, bird-like energy. She was painting a verbal masterpiece of the trip to my father, George, who sat in his worn leather armchair like a king on his throne. "Oh, George, can you just picture it?" she gushed, her voice an octave higher than usual. "The white cliffs of Dover to start, then Paris, and then the real magic begins. The sunsets over Santorini, the ancient streets of Rome, a gondola in Venice." She clasped her hands together under her chin. "And the best part is that we'll have the whole family there to celebrate with us. 40 years. It's just going to be perfect." My father beamed, that familiar, self-satisfied look spreading across his face. It was the look he got when the world arranged itself exactly to his liking. He finally turned his attention to me, his smile tightening just a fraction as it landed on me. It never quite reached his eyes. "Mark, glad you could make it. We need to go over the final arrangements for the cruise." I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cheap champagne, the bubbles stinging my tongue. "It sounds incredible, Mom, Dad. You two deserve it." The words felt like ash in my mouth. "It is," Patricia chirped, gliding over to straighten a cushion on the sofa. "And because it's such a monumental occasion, our 40th after all, we've decided it needs to be a very intimate, exclusive affair. Family only." The two words dropped into the stuffy room like stones in a still pond. Family only. The ripples spread out, chilling the air around me. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was not included in that definition. I'd been auditioning for the role my entire life, and I had never been cast. "I understand," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a testament to years of practice in hiding my own feelings. George leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees, adopting the posture of a man about to deliver a difficult but necessary truth. He was condescending even in his body language. "No, son, I don't think you do. We need to be perfectly clear so there are no misunderstandings. When we say family only, we mean blood family. Our children, their spouses. No, outsiders. Outsider." Oh, bloody hell. I just got a physical reaction to that. Imagine paying for your family's entire lifestyle, their cars, their roofs, their weddings, and they look you dead in the eye and call you an outsider? That is sickening. There it was, the single word that defined my entire existence within this family. It wasn't shouted. It was delivered calmly, clinically, as if stating a simple fact, like the sky is blue or the grass is green. And that made it 1,000 times worse. After 8 years of being their silent benefactor, their emergency fund, their get-out-of-jail-free card. After watching my every achievement be minimized while my brothers were celebrated with parades I was expected to pay for. After a lifetime of feeling like a guest in my own home, that one simple word landed with the force of a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs and left a cold, heavy void in the center of my chest. My eyes darted to my younger brother, James, the golden child. He'd been idly scrolling through his phone, feigning disinterest, but I knew he'd heard every word. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I sent him a silent, desperate plea. Say something. Anything. You're my brother. He looked away. He studied a fleck of dust on his jeans. He cleared his throat, and then he shrugged. A small, almost imperceptible lift of his shoulders. It's their anniversary, Mark, he mumbled, not even looking at me. It's their choice. And that was it. The final nail. The quiet, dismissive shrug from the one person I thought, deep down, might still be in my corner. It wasn't just my parents. It was him, too. I was truly, completely alone. A strange and terrible calm washed over me. The trembling in my hands ceased. The roaring in my ears faded to a dull hum. I looked at my father's smug face, my mother's feigned sympathy, my brother's cowardly indifference, and I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a forgiving smile. It was the cold, sharp smile of a man who had finally, blessedly, run out of dams to give. Of course, I said, my voice as smooth and cool as marble. Your celebration. Your rules. My father leaned back, visibly pleased, relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. The crisis was averted. He even had the gall to add, "Good. That's very understanding of you. Maybe you can watch the house for us while we're gone. Make sure the pipes don't freeze." I held his gaze, my smile never wavering. I let the insult hang in the air, another ghost in a room already full of them. Then, slowly, I pulled out my phone. The bright screen illuminated my face. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name. "I understand completely," I repeated, my voice a soft purr of menace. I pressed the call button. The screen glowed with the words, "Oceania Cruises, VIP services." As the phone began to ring, a tinny, electronic sound in the suddenly silent room, the present moment dissolved. My mind plunged back through time, sifting through the wreckage of years of slights and sacrifices. This wasn't about a $30,000 cruise. That was just the tip of the iceberg. This was about the colossal, submerged mass of pain and disrespect that had been slowly tearing a hole in my soul. This was about a promise. A promise I'd made to the only person in this family who ever truly loved me. A promise that had twisted itself from a sacred vow into a gilded cage. The memory was 15 years old, but as vivid as yesterday. The hospital room smelled of bleach and wilting flowers. My grandmother, my father's mother, lay propped against a mountain of pillows, looking as fragile as a dried leaf. She had been my champion, my confidant, the one who saw the quiet, sensitive boy hiding behind a wall of stoicism. She was the only one who ever called my father out on his nonsense. She beckoned me closer, her hand, all paper-thin skin and prominent blue veins, finding mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong, a final spark of her formidable spirit. "Mark," she'd whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "Listen to me. Your father, he's a good man at heart, but his pride is a sickness. It blinds him. And your mother, she enables him, always smoothing things over, pretending everything is perfect. It's not perfect, Mark. It's brittle." A rattling cough shook her tiny frame, and I felt a surge of panic. "Don't talk, Grandma. Save your strength." She squeezed my hand harder. "No, you need to hear this." Her eyes, cloudy with age and medication, were sharp and clear. "This family, it will fly apart if someone doesn't hold it together. Your brother, James, he's a good boy, but he's weak. He follows the path of least resistance. It's going to be you, Mark. You're the strong one, the steady one." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. "Promise me," she rasped, her voice desperate. "Promise me you'll keep this family together. Look after them even when they don't deserve it. Promise me." This explains so much. OP wasn't just being a doormat. He was bound by a promise to his dying grandmother. It's incredibly sad how toxic families will use your good heart and your loyalty as a weapon against you. What could I do? I was 27 years old, watching the center of my world fade away. I would have promised her anything. I promise, Grandma, I sobbed, pressing her hand to my cheek. I promise. That promise became the operating system of my life. It ran in the background of every decision, every interaction. It was why, 5 years ago, I found myself standing in a sun-drenched Tuscan villa, watching my brother James marry his college sweetheart, Chloe. It was a storybook wedding, complete with a harpist, a 5-course meal, and enough flowers to fill a botanical garden. It was also a wedding they couldn't possibly afford. I remembered the phone call from my mother a few months prior. "Oh, Mark, it's just a disaster. The venue Chloe wants is twice what we budgeted for, and she has her heart set on it. Your father is so stressed. I just wish there was a way. You've been doing so well with that computer business of yours. I was thinking maybe you could see it as an early inheritance gift, a way to invest in the family's happiness." So I invested $65,000, wired directly to the wedding planner. I told them it was from a stock that had paid off unexpectedly, a lie to protect my father's fragile pride. My reward for this grand gesture? At the reception, I found my name card placed at table 14, in the far corner of the terrace, next to the kitchen doors. I was seated with a collection of my mother's most distant cousins and my father's former secretary. My seat was right next to my great-aunt Carol, a woman whose primary conversational tactic was the passive-aggressive compliment. "Mark, dear, it's so lovely to see you," she chirped, patting my hand. "This is all just breathtaking. James is such a success, isn't he? To be able to provide all this for his bride. You must be so proud." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And it's so wonderful that you have your little hobby. It's important for a man to have interests, even if it's just playing on computers." I just smiled, the muscles in my jaw aching. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. My hobby was a digital marketing firm I had built from nothing, a firm that employed 12 people and was at that very moment paying for the vintage Barolo being poured down her throat. But I remembered my promise. Keep the family together. So I said nothing. This became the pattern. My life was a series of quiet contributions, erased from the official family history. The biggest erasure came 3 years later, when my sister Amy and her deadbeat husband, Robert, decided to buy a house. Robert's artisanal pickle business had, predictably, soured, leaving them with a trail of debt and a credit score that was a joke. The call once again came from my mother. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't ask for money directly. Instead, she painted a heartbreaking picture of her grandchildren, my niece and nephew, living in a cramped apartment, their future prospects dimming by the day. "They've found the most perfect little house, Mark," she'd sighed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "A big backyard for the kids to play in a wonderful school district. But the banks, they're so heartless. They don't see the potential. They just see numbers." She paused dramatically. "You've always been so smart, so strategic. I was just thinking, from an investment standpoint, a property in that neighborhood is a sure thing." She made it sound like she was offering me a hot stock tip. An investment. A $50,000 investment in my sister's future, with no expectation of ever seeing a dime of it back. But she had mentioned the kids. That was the kill shot. I thought of my promise to my grandmother. Look after them. I transferred the money. Amy called me, crying with gratitude. For a week, I felt like I had done something good. Then came the housewarming party. I walked in to hear Robert holding court in the kitchen, a beer in his hand, telling a rapt audience of his friends how he'd outsmarted the system and hustled like a beast to secure the loan. My parents stood beside him, beaming with pride. George clapped him on the back. "That's my boy. Knew you had it in you." I was never mentioned. My $50,000 contribution had vanished into the thin air of Robert's ego and my family's collective amnesia. My business partner, Sarah, was the only person who knew the full, unvarnished truth. She was more than a partner. She was my best friend, the family I chose. She kept a mental ledger of every slight and every loan I was guilted into. The new roof on my parents' house, $15,000. The emergency dental surgery for my mother, $8,000. The annual family beach house rental in the Outer Banks that everyone assumed just magically materialized each year, $10,000, annually. She was in my office the day my mother called about the 40th anniversary cruise. I foolishly put the call on speakerphone. And it simply has to be the Mediterranean Vista Suite. George has his heart absolutely set on it. Patricia was chirping. Of course, the deposit is a bit steep, $30,000, but I told George not to worry his handsome head about it. I said, I'm sure Mark will be thrilled to contribute as his anniversary gift to us. It's the least he can do, really, given how much we've supported his endeavors. After I hung up, Sarah just stared at me, her expression a mixture of pity and fury. Mark, I swear to God, if you do this, I will stage an intervention, she said, her voice dangerously low. They have just demoted you from family ATM to a GoFundMe campaign. They are not even pretending anymore. It's their 40th, Sarah, I said weakly, the excuse sounding pathetic even to my own ears. It's a big deal. And what about you? She shot back, standing up and pacing in front of my desk. When is it your turn to be a big deal? When do you get to have a life that isn't just a support system for a bunch of ungrateful narcissists? That promise you made to your grandmother was about love, not financial servitude. She would be horrified if she saw this. They are burning you down to the ground, Mark, and you are handing them the matches and the gasoline. We all need a friend like Sarah. She is the MVP of this story, giving OP the brutal reality check he desperately needed. They literally demoted him from family ATM to a GoFundMe campaign. I knew she was right. Every rational cell in my body screamed that she was right. But the ghost of my grandmother, the weight of that 15-year-old promise, was a heavy shroud. Keep the family together. So I paid the deposit. I used the bonus from the Henderson account, a massive client I had spent 6 months courting and had landed against all odds. I remembered telling my father about the final pitch. He'd waved his hand dismissively. Sounds like a long shot, son. Don't get your hopes up. That long shot was now funding his fantasy trip. And now, standing in this suffocating living room, the word outsider still ringing in my ears, I finally saw it with blinding clarity. Sarah was right. My grandmother, in her love, had burdened me with an impossible task. You can't hold a family together when they have already cut you out of the photograph. The chains of that promise didn't just break. They evaporated into dust. The calm that enveloped me wasn't peace. It was the chilling, exhilarating freedom of a man who has finally realized he's been trying to save people who are perfectly happy to watch him drown. Hello? A crisp, professional voice said from my phone's speaker. You've reached Oceania's VIP services. This is Maria speaking. How may I help you today? I met my father's gaze across the room, my smile a sharp, merciless line. Hello, Maria, I said, my voice resonating with a power I never knew I possessed. I'm calling about booking number 7-4, Bravo Zulu 5. My name is Mark Peterson. The immediate effect in the room was like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. My father's self-satisfied posture stiffened, the condescending relief on his face curdling into confusion. My mother, who had been rearranging a collection of porcelain birds on the mantelpiece, froze mid-flutter, her head cocked like one of her ceramic pets. James, for the first time all afternoon, looked up from his phone with a deep, uncertain frown, his bubble of willful ignorance finally pierced. I let my voice remain deceptively calm, a placid lake surface over a raging abyss. I'm the primary cardholder on that account, Maria. The trip is booked under the name George and Patricia Peterson. On the other end of the line, Maria's voice was a smooth, corporate bomb, utterly oblivious to the domestic war I was about to escalate. Yes, of course, Mr. Peterson. I have the booking right here. The 40th anniversary Mediterranean Dream Cruise, departing from Southampton. The Vista Suite. A truly beautiful choice, sir. How can I assist you today? I let the silence stretch for a beat longer, watching the confusion on their faces begin to curdle into alarm. I was the director of this little play, and I was going to let the tension build to a crescendo. Maria, I began, my tone measured and polite. I have a quick question about the payment schedule. I see the initial deposit has been processed. I'd like to put a temporary hold on all future automatic payments. Can we do that? Mark, what in the hell do you think you're doing? My father's voice was a low growl, the first rumble of a coming eruption. He started to rise from his throne. I held up a single, steady finger to silence him. My eyes locked on his. I didn't even flinch. And while you're at it, Maria, I continued into the phone. Could you please confirm for me what the cancellation policy is for this booking? Specifically, what would the financial penalty be if the booking were to be canceled? Say, today. That got their full attention. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if I'd physically wounded her. James's jaw literally dropped. Certainly, sir, Maria said with cheerful efficiency. Let me just pull up the terms and conditions. Yes, here we are. This booking was secured with a $30,000 non-refundable deposit. Therefore, if you were to cancel at any point, the penalty would be the forfeiture of that full deposit amount. Holy moly! He called the cruise line on speakerphone right in front of them, taking a $30,000 loss just to teach them a lesson and pull the rug out from under them? That is an absolute power move. $30,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air, each zero a testament to my folly. Thank you, Maria. That's very clear. That's all the information I need for now. I'll call back if I decide to proceed. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. The silence lasted for 3, 2, 1. You have no right. George's roar was explosive, his face turning a blotchy, apoplectic shade of red. He was on his feet now, his finger jabbing the air. That is our cruise. Our anniversary. A gift from our son. A gift? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I took a step forward. Let's talk about gifts, Dad. A gift is something given out of love, out of appreciation. It's not a membership fee to a club that still blackballs you. And let's be crystal clear. I am not our son in this equation. I am the outsider, remember? And the outsider just decided to close his wallet. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? I let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Wrong again. It was my gift, paid for with my money. The $30,000 deposit that secured your dream trip came directly from my bonus. I let my eyes drift over to the framed photo of him on the golf course, holding a trophy. You remember the Henderson account? The one you told me was a waste of my time, and that I should focus on something more tangible? Well, they were very, very happy with my intangible work. That deposit was my waste of time paying you back in spades. Patricia started to cry, the soft, manipulative tears she always used to get her way. Mark, please, she whimpered. You can't do this to us. It's our 40th anniversary. It means everything to us. You don't take back a gift. You're right, Mom. You don't, I said, turning the full force of my anger on her. You also don't take someone's money with one hand and slap them in the face with the other. You don't cash my checks and then call me an outsider behind my back. You don't get to have it both ways. The free ride is over. I pivoted, my gaze landing on my brother. He was staring at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly started reciting Shakespeare. James, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but still edged with the sharp steel of betrayal. Let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we? Your wedding, Tuscany, a fairy tale, right? He nodded numbly, his mouth slightly open. Do you remember when the band you booked got stuck in traffic outside Florence and canceled at the last minute? Do you remember the panic on Chloe's face? And then, magically, a new, better, and much more expensive string quartet appeared an hour later to save the day. Who do you think made those frantic calls and paid that rush fee in euros on their credit card? It wasn't Dad. It was me, from my hobby fund. I didn't wait for him to process it. I turned my attention to my sister, Amy, who was trying to shrink into the floral wallpaper next to her worthless husband, Robert. She looked pale, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "Amy," I said, my voice gentle but carrying across the room with lethal precision. "We need to talk about your house. That beautiful house in the perfect school district." I paused, letting her squirm. "That $50,000 down payment. The one that miraculously appeared in your bank account just in time for closing, after every lender in the state had laughed you out of their office. Did you really think that money just fell from the sky? Did you really believe Robert's story about a short-term, high-yield investment paying off?" She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. Robert, however, puffed out his chest. "You have no damn right to bring that up. That was a private family matter," he snarled. "IT became my matter when I paid for it," I thundered, my composure finally shattering, the years of repressed anger erupting like a volcano. "I have every right. I have nearly 200,000 rights, to be exact. That's a conservative estimate of what I have poured into this black hole of a family over the past 8 years. I started pacing, ticking off the receipts on my fingers, the ghosts of transactions past. Your wedding, James. Your house, Amy. The new roof on this house 2 years ago when it was leaking into the dining room. Dad's dental implants that he shows off to everyone at the country club. Mom's emergency gallbladder surgery that insurance only partially covered. The annual family reunions in a beach house none of you could afford for a single weekend. Who do you think has been bankrolling this entire facade of upper-middle-class perfection? It was me, the outsider, the boy who plays on his computers." The room was utterly, profoundly still. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I had done it. I had finally detonated the bomb I'd been sitting on for years. I had ripped the perfectly curated family portrait off the wall and exposed the termites and rot devouring the structure from within. George, ever the proud patriarch, was the first to recover, at least partially. He drew himself up to his full height, his face a stiff mask of outrage and humiliation. "This is a disgusting display, Mark," he said through gritted teeth. "A private family matter. We will reimburse you. Every cent." A raw, bitter laugh ripped from my throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted scorn. "Pay me back?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Pay me back with what, Dad? Your pension that you've already borrowed against twice? With Mom's jewelry? Didn't you have to sell Grandma's diamond necklace last year just to make the mortgage payment?" I leaned in, delivering the coup de grace. A mortgage payment that, by the way, I had to secretly cover for 3 months after that, so the bank wouldn't start foreclosure proceedings? Did Mom forget to mention that part? "Yes. Let it all out, Mark." He just methodically laid out $200,000 worth of receipts to their faces. "The fact that the dad secretly sold Grandma's necklace to look rich is just... wow, what a bunch of frauds." That was it. The final, unrecoverable blow. Patricia let out a choked, wounded sob and collapsed into an armchair, her face in her hands. George looked like I had physically gutted him. He staggered back a step, his face ashen. "I'm done," I said, my voice dropping back to a cold, quiet calm. The rage was spent, leaving behind a chilling clarity. I am officially and wholeheartedly accepting my position as the outsider. And as the outsider, I am no longer bound by the obligations of a son. I am no longer your safety net. I am no longer your financial advisor. I am no longer cleaning up your messes. I walked to the door, pausing one last time in front of my brother. "I'm going to the Ritz-Carlton tonight. I've booked the honeymoon suite. It has a spectacular view of the city, a place where the air is clean." I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze unwavering. "You can come and find me when you finally decide whether your loyalty is to your brother or just to the family's bank account." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned, walked out the door, and closed it softly behind me, leaving them to choke on the truth in the ruins of the comfortable, subsidized world I had built for them. The second the heavy oak door clicked shut, the adrenaline that had fueled my tirade vanished in a rush, leaving a vacuum of trembling emptiness. I stood on the familiar flagstone porch for a long moment, sucking in the cool evening air, each breath a conscious effort to keep from falling apart. From inside, I could hear the muffled eruption of shouting. The storm I had unleashed was now raging, and I was, for the first time, on the outside of it. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling. I didn't linger. I walked to my car on unsteady legs, slid into the driver's seat, and just drove. I didn't have a destination. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't heading for the Ritz, not yet. I needed a buffer zone, a place to decompress before I could face being alone with my own thoughts. I ended up at a place I hadn't been to in years. A scenic overlook on the edge of town. A spot the local teenagers used as a make-out point. I used to come here to escape the suffocating atmosphere of that house, to dream of a life somewhere else. The city lights spread out below me like a carpet of fallen stars. A vast, glittering expanse of lives that had nothing to do with me. It was a comfort. My phone, which I'd tossed onto the passenger seat, began to vibrate violently, skittering across the leather. I picked it up. The screen was a nightmare collage of my family's panic. 15 missed calls from my mother. A string of texts from my father, escalating from angry demands to incoherent, typo-riddled threats. A single, pathetic message from Amy. "Mark, please call me, we can fix this." Fix this. As if it were a leaky faucet and not a shattered foundation. I silenced the phone and threw it back on the seat. The only person on earth I wanted to talk to was Sarah. I dialed her number. "It's done," I said, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Mark? Oh my God. Are you okay? What happened? Where are you?" Her voice was a lifeline of sanity in my sea of chaos. I told her everything, the words spilling out of me in a torrent. The outsider comment, the cruise, the call to Maria, the litany of financial receipts I'd thrown in their faces, the final ultimatum to James. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was long and profound. "Good," she said finally, her voice ringing with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. "Good. It's about damn time, Mark. I'm proud of you." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Where are you now?" "Some stupid overlook. Feeling like I just jumped out of a plane without a parachute." "You did," she said. "But the plane was on fire and heading for a mountain. Now listen to me. Go to the Ritz. Check into that ridiculous suite. Order the most expensive steak on the room service menu and a bottle of scotch that costs more than my car payment. You didn't just burn a bridge, Mark. You escaped a burning building. Now go take care of the sole survivor." Her words cut through the fog of my panic. She was right. I started the car and drove downtown, the city lights growing brighter, guiding me toward a new, uncertain future. Back at the house, as I learned later from a shamefaced James, the scene had devolved into pure pandemonium. My departure had removed the central pillar of their dysfunctional family structure, and the roof was caving in. George, my father, immediately rounded on my mother. "This is your fault, Patricia. You and your constant coddling, making him think he was special." "My fault?" she shrieked, her grief instantly transmuting into rage. "You're the one who called your own son an outsider to his face. You have the emotional intelligence of a rock, George. What did you think was going to happen?" Robert, my brother-in-law, seeing his comfortable, subsidized lifestyle flashing before his eyes, jumped into the fray. He had no right to bring up the house. That was a gift between family. It was tacky. "Was it, Robert?" Amy whispered, finding a tiny sliver of a backbone for the first time in her marriage. "Or was it just another secret we were all expected to keep, so you could pretend you were a self-made man?" Robert stared at her, speechless. But the main event, the real battle, was between my father and my brother. George grabbed James by the arm, his face contorted with fury. "You need to go after him. Right now. Go to his apartment and talk some sense into him. Apologize for us. Do whatever it takes." James pulled his arm away. "And say what, Dad?" he shot back, his voice cracking with a frustration that had been simmering for years. Should I tell him he's wrong? Because he's not. We've been treating him like a second-class citizen for my entire adult life while we cashed his checks. You know it, I know it, and he knows it. The game is up. He is your brother, George bellowed. Exactly, James yelled back, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. He's my brother, and I just sat there and let you call him an outsider. I let you do it. What the hell does that make me? With that, James stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that my grandmother's portrait, the one hanging in the hall, tilted sideways on its hook. But he didn't come to me. Not right away. He got in his car and drove just as I had. He told me later that he was drowning in a tidal wave of self-loathing. Every memory of his own complicity was replaying in his mind. Every time he'd accepted praise he didn't deserve, every time he'd stayed silent during one of our father's dismissive jokes, every time he'd enjoyed a luxury paid for by the brother he allowed his family to disrespect. He was parked by the side of a road, his head in his hands, when he got a text from his wife, Chloe. She had been upstairs during the initial confrontation but had heard everything. The text was simple and brutal. They're eating each other alive in there. Are you going to be their son? Or are you going to be his brother? You can't be both anymore. That was the push he needed. He drove to the Ritz-Carlton, but he didn't come straight up. He confessed later that he sat in the opulent, hushed lobby for nearly an hour, watching the wealthy and powerful drift by. He was trying to build up the courage to face me, to face himself. Upstairs, I had followed Sarah's prescription. I was ensconced in the honeymoon suite. It was absurdly luxurious, a palace of polished wood, soft lighting, and quiet efficiency. I had ordered the steak and the scotch. I was sitting in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city, when there was a soft, hesitant knock on the door. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment that would define everything. This would tell me if I had merely amputated a toxic limb, or if I had lost my entire family. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. James stood there. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, stripped of his golden child glow. His face was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed, and his shoulders were slumped in a posture of utter defeat. He wasn't there to negotiate. He wasn't there to talk sense into me. He was there as a man who was completely and utterly broken. "Mark," he said, his voice cracking on my name. Can I please come in? We need to talk. For real this time. Please." I stepped back from the door, holding it open as he walked past me into the room. The luxurious suite, with its king-sized bed and panoramic city views, suddenly felt as sterile and confining as a hospital waiting room. James didn't seem to notice his surroundings. He walked to the center of the vast Persian rug and just stood there, adrift, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans as if to keep them from shaking. "I am so sorry," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of guilt that had finally broken through the dam of his denial. "Mark, I'm sorry. For today. For everything. I was a coward. I've always been a coward, and I never let myself see it until tonight." I didn't respond. I walked over to the ridiculously well-stocked minibar, found the bottle of 18-year-old Macallan I'd ordered, and poured 2 generous measures into heavy crystal glasses. I handed one to him. His fingers were cold as they brushed against mine. He took the glass, his hand trembling so much that the amber liquid sloshed against the sides. I waited. I had heard a lifetime of apologies from this family. They were usually hollow, self-serving things designed to smooth things over, to get things back to the comfortable, dysfunctional status quo. They were almost always followed by a "but." "It's not just that I stood by," he continued, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was painful to witness. "It's that I participated. I cashed the checks. I accepted the praise. I let them hold me up as the good son, while you were the difficult one. Every time Dad made a crack about your job at Christmas dinner, I laughed along. Every time Mom compared our accomplishments, I just soaked it up. I loved being the golden child. It was easy. He took a large gulp of the scotch, wincing as the fiery liquid hit the back of his throat. He finally lifted his head and looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was not just regret, but a profound and shattering shame. "That's the worst part, Mark," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not that I was oblivious. I wasn't. Deep down, I knew. I knew you were paying for everything. I knew how they treated you. I saw it all, and I chose not to see it. I actively chose to look away because my life was comfortable. My life was easy, and my comfort was more important to me than your pain." Takes a lot of guts to admit that. James could have stayed the golden child and made excuses, but he owned up to his cowardice. It's rare to see an enabler actually break out of the fog and take accountability. That was it. That was the confession that shattered my anger into a million pieces. It wasn't just an apology for his actions. It was a full-throated admission of his own moral and ethical failure. He wasn't making excuses. He was taking ownership of his weakness. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I finally found my voice. "Why now, James?" I asked, my own voice quiet, stripped of its earlier fury. "What was different about today?" "You," he said simply, shaking his head in disbelief. "The look on your face when you smiled before you made that call. It wasn't anger. It was nothing. It was like you were already gone. And when you walked out that door, it was like a spell was broken. The whole illusion just fell apart." He described the scene at the house after I left. The screaming, the accusations, the blame shifting. "It was disgusting," he said. "They were like rats in a trap, turning on each other. And I realized in that moment that you weren't just the family bank. You were the glue. You were the emotional ballast. You absorbed all their dysfunction, all their anxiety, all their pride and insecurity, so the rest of us could float along pretending we were a normal, happy family." He drained his glass in one swallow. "And we let you drown so we could stay afloat." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The only sound in the vast suite, the faint hum of the city below and the clinking of ice in my glass. The white-hot rage I had been carrying for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a deep, weary sadness for the brother I could have had, for the family we could have been. "I made a promise," I said softly, and for the first time, I told him about our grandmother, about her dying wish in that sterile hospital room. I thought I was honoring her. I thought that was what she would have wanted. "She would have wanted you to be happy, Mark," James said, his voice thick. "She wouldn't have wanted you to be a martyr. You were the only one trying to keep that promise. The rest of us were just taking advantage of it." He straightened up, a new resolve hardening his features. He pulled out his phone. "We need to call them." My gut clenched instantly. "No, absolutely not. I'm done talking to them, James. I meant what I said." "I know," he said, his gaze steady and clear. "That's why I'm going to do the talking. You're not going to say a word. But you need to be here. They need to hear it from me. And you need to hear me say it." He dialed our parents' number and put the phone on speaker. It sat on the polished marble coffee table between us like a small, black bomb, ticking. Our mother answered on the first ring, her voice a frantic, hopeful mess. "James? Oh, thank God. James, did you find him? Is he okay? Please, tell him we're sorry. Tell him it was all a misunderstanding. We'll do anything." "Mom, stop," James cut in. His voice was calm, but carried a new, unfamiliar weight of authority. It was the voice of an adult, not a child. "Stop talking and listen. Mark is here with me. He's safe. But you are not going to talk to him tonight. You are not going to apologize. You are not going to make promises. For the first time in your lives, you and Dad are just going to listen." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What? James, what are you talking about? We need to fix this." "There is nothing to fix tonight, Mom," James said, his voice as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. "There is only understanding the damage you have done. For my entire life, you've held me up as the perfect son, the successful one, The one who did everything right. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? My success was built on Mark's sacrifices. You propped me up by pushing him down. You praised my accomplishments, which were funded by the brother whose own accomplishments you constantly belittled. That's not true, Patricia cried, but her protest was weak, pathetic. It is true. James's voice cracked with a sudden, fierce emotion. You turned me into your trophy, something to show off to your friends at the country club, but you never once asked me what I wanted. You never cared that your perfect son was a coward who stood by and watched his own brother get emotionally and financially bled dry year after year. You created this mess. Both of you. I could hear my father's muffled bellowing in the background. Give me the damn phone, Patricia. A moment later, his voice boomed from the speaker, strained with fury. James, what is the meaning of this insubordination? You were supposed to be on our side. There are no sides anymore, Dad, James said, his voice dropping again, becoming dangerously quiet. There's just right and wrong. And what I have done to Mark for years is wrong. He is my brother. He is my family. And I will not stand by 1 second longer and let you treat him like an inconvenience, an ATM or an outsider. That ends tonight. He leaned closer to the phone, his voice clear and unwavering, delivering the final, devastating blow. So here is what is going to happen. Mark and I are going to start seeing a family therapist to try and undo some of the damage that you have inflicted on our relationship. And if you ever want to have a real, honest relationship with either of your sons again, you will join us. You will sit in a room with a professional and you will listen. You will learn. Until you are ready to do that, you can consider yourselves cut off. Don't call us. Don't text us. We're done. James stepping up and dropping the hammer on the parents, forcing them to face a therapist before they ever get access to their sons again. That's exactly how you establish healthy boundaries. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a vacuum of shock and shattered pride. I could picture them perfectly, standing in their living room, their world tilted on its axis, the power dynamic they had so carefully maintained for 40 years utterly destroyed in the space of a 5-minute phone call. James didn't wait for a response. He reached out with a steady hand and ended the call. The bomb had been detonated. He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolute, the shame replaced by a quiet, steely determination. Okay, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Now we can start. The days immediately following what James and I began to call the summit at the Ritz were eerily quiet. The incessant buzzing of my phone stopped. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the background music of my life for decades faded. The silence was a profound relief, but it was also disorienting, like a phantom limb that had finally stopped aching. I kept expecting a call, a text, an ambush, but there was nothing. James was true to his word. 2 days later, he sent me a link to the website of a therapist. Her name was Dr. Evans, and her online photo showed a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her specialty was family systems and healing relational trauma. Our first session, a week later, was one of the most awkward 90 minutes of my life. We sat in 2 plush, comfortable armchairs that felt like witness stands, the space between us charged with unspoken history. So, Dr. Evans began, her voice calm and measured as she looked at us over the top of her glasses. James, you told me on the phone that you feel you've been a coward and a beneficiary of a toxic system. Mark, you feel you've been the family ATM and the designated outsider. Let's start there. Mark, tell me about the outsider. And so we talked. For the first time in our lives, we talked without the filters of our assigned roles, without our parents acting as skewed interpreters. It was like learning a new language. I talked about the crushing weight of my promise to our grandmother, the desperate, childish need for our father's approval that I was only now beginning to admit to myself, and the slow, corrosive acid of being constantly undervalued. James, in turn, talked about the suffocating pressure of being the golden child. He confessed that he often felt like an imposter, his successes feeling hollow because he knew deep down they weren't entirely his own. He spoke of the secret resentment he felt towards me for making his life so easy, a resentment that was tangled up with a deep, abiding guilt. It was brutal. It was exhausting. There were long, painful silences where the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. There were moments of raw, unfiltered anger. But underneath it all, there was a fragile, emerging thread of honesty. We were dismantling the broken engine of our brotherhood, piece by painful piece, examining the rust and the cracked gears, trying to figure out if we could build something new, something that actually worked. About a month into our sessions, I received a text from my sister, Amy. It was different from her previous panicked messages. This one was simple. "Can I buy you a coffee? Just me. No Robert. I need to talk to you." I was hesitant. My trust in her was a shattered thing. But Dr. Evans had been encouraging me to differentiate between the enablers and the architects of my family's dysfunction. I agreed to meet. We met at a neutral, anonymous coffee shop downtown. She looked terrible. She was pale, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She fidgeted with a sugar packet, tearing it into tiny strips, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she said finally. Her voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. "There's no excuse for my behavior, for any of it. I was weak and I was scared. I've always been scared of Dad. And I've been scared of being a failure, like..." She trailed off, unable to say her husband's name. "But that's my problem, not yours. You were nothing but good and generous to me, and I let you down. I stood by and let them treat you that way, because I was benefiting from it." She pushed a plain white envelope across the table. It was thick with cash. "It's not much," she said, a flush of shame coloring her cheeks. "It's $500. It's all I could scrape together from my part-time job without Robert knowing. I'm opening my own bank account next week." A flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. "I'm going to pay you back, Mark. All of it. The $50,000. Even if it takes me the rest of my life." I looked at the envelope, a down payment on her own liberation. Then I looked at my sister, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the funny, fierce little girl I used to build forts with in the backyard. I pushed the envelope back towards her. "Keep it, Amy," I said gently. "This isn't a loan. This is your escape fund. For you and the kids. Use it to build something for yourself." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of gratitude. "Really? Really?" I said. "But the apology, that I accept." It was a start. A single, fragile plank laid across a chasm of hurt. We talked for another hour, and she told me about her plans to go back to school to get a degree in nursing. She was taking her life back. The real test of my own resolve came a few weeks later. My phone rang, and the caller ID was a landline I knew all too well. Mom and Dad. My heart did a familiar lurch, a Pavlovian response of dread and obligation. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the green accept button. Dr. Evans's voice echoed in my head. "A boundary is not a boundary unless it is enforced." I let it go to voicemail. The message was a predictable masterpiece of passive aggression. "Mark, dear." My mother's voice was strained and overly sweet, the voice she used when she wanted something. "I do hope you're doing well. We haven't heard from you. Listen, the quarterly property tax bill has arrived, and with all this recent unpleasantness, your father and I find ourselves in a bit of a bind. I know you're busy, but I was just wondering if you could possibly see your way to..." I deleted the message before she could finish. The old guilt was there, a faint, phantom ache, but for the first time it was weaker than my resolve. I texted James. Mom called. The property tax gambit. His reply was almost instantaneous. "Got it. I'll handle it." He called me later that evening. "Okay, it's handled," he said, a weary sigh in his voice. I called them. I told them that if they need financial help, they need to act like adults. They can sell the house and downsize. They can get a reverse mortgage. They can meet with a financial advisor. I told them we would help them explore those options, but we would not be giving them another blank check. The bank of Mark and James is officially closed. How did they take it? I asked, picturing the explosion. James laughed, a short, humorless sound. Oh, there was yelling, accusations of elder abuse, a dramatic declaration that we would regret this when they were dead. The usual Tuesday night performance. He paused. But the boundary is holding, Mark. It's holding. It was. For the first time in my adult life, my parents' financial problems were not my problems. They were just problems, and someone else was dealing with them. It was a strange, disorienting, and absolutely wonderful feeling. The silence that followed wasn't unsettling anymore. It was the sound of peace. The next 6 months were a period of quiet, seismic shifts. Life settled into a new rhythm. My therapy sessions with James became less about excavating the past and more about building a future. We were learning to communicate, to argue constructively, to be brothers without the toxic filter of our parents' expectations. We went to baseball games. We helped each other with mundane weekend projects. I helped him build a deck. He helped me install a new smart home system. It was simple, normal, and more fulfilling than any grand family gathering had ever been. My relationship with Amy also continued to mend. She enrolled in nursing school, her confidence growing with every exam she aced. She and Robert were in counseling, and while their future was uncertain, she was no longer a passive victim in her own life. She was fighting. From my parents, there was nothing but a vast, cold silence. I had accepted that this was the new reality. I had mourned the loss of the parents I wished I had, and I was making my peace with the ones I was left with. I assumed they would remain encased in their pride, martyrs to their own stubbornness, until the end. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, my world tilted on its axis again. My phone rang. It was James. His voice was tight with a panic I hadn't heard since the night at the Ritz. "It's Dad," he said, the words tumbling out, breathless. He collapsed on the golf course. They think it's a heart attack. A mild one, maybe, but he's at St. Mary's Hospital. He's stable, but Mark, he's asking for you. My blood ran cold. In an instant, all the anger, all the resentment, all the carefully constructed boundaries, they all just evaporated, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching fear. He was still my father. I met James in the grim, fluorescent-lit lobby of the cardiac care unit. We found our mother huddled in a hard plastic chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her makeup was smeared, her usual impeccable composure shattered. She looked up as we approached, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. There were no accusations, no manipulations, no guilt trips. There was only raw, undisguised fear. She looked at me, and it was as if she were seeing me for the first time. "He's been asking for you, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He keeps saying your name." I went into the room alone. My father was lying in the hospital bed, looking pale and diminished against the stark white sheets. He was hooked up to a constellation of monitors that beeped and blinked with a steady, life-affirming rhythm. The man who had always seemed so large and indomitable, so full of bluster and certainty, was gone. In his place was a frail, frightened old man. He turned his head as I entered, his eyes fluttering open. When they focused on me, they held no judgment, no disappointment, no condescension, only a profound and weary relief. "Mark," he said, his voice a weak, papery rasp. I pulled a chair from the corner and sat down beside the bed, my own heart aching with a complicated mix of emotions. "Hey, Dad," I said softly. "You gave us a scare." He attempted a weak, lopsided smile. "Always gotta be the center of attention," he wheezed. We sat in silence for a long moment, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. "You do a lot of thinking," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the acoustic tile ceiling. "When you're lying here, thinking you might be checking out, you think about what's important, what you leave behind." He took a shaky, rattling breath. "All my life I thought it was about the house, the career, the respect of your peers at the club, the right car in the driveway. He turned his head slowly to look at me again, his eyes watery. I was a fool, Mark. A damn fool. It's none of that. It's not the things you accumulate. It's the people you love. It's family. And I almost threw it all away because I was too proud and too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. Tears began to well in his eyes and spill down his temples into his graying hair. I'm sorry, son, he choked out, the words thick with a lifetime of unspoken regret. I am so sorry. For everything. For being a proud, stubborn old bastard. For not seeing you. For not being the father you deserved. This wasn't the coerced, self-serving apology I had once imagined I might get. This was a raw, painful confession, stripped bare by mortality. It broke through the final, carefully constructed wall around my heart. I reached out and took his hand, felt thin and frail in mine. It's okay, Dad, I said, my own voice thick with unshed tears. It's okay. Just get some rest now. We'll talk later. That heart attack, as terrifying as it was the shock to the system our family needed. It was the near-death experience that finally allowed my father to see beyond the narrow confines of his own ego. It wasn't the loss of my money that changed him. It was the fear of dying alone, of leaving behind a legacy of bitterness and broken relationships. His recovery was slow, but his perspective had fundamentally shifted. The bluster was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful humility. He and my mother started going to therapy, first on their own, then with Dr. Evans. They were doing the work. 2 months later, after he was home and steadily getting stronger, my phone rang. It was my father. Mark, he said. His voice was still a little weak, but it was clearer, steadier. Hey, Dad, how are you feeling today? Better. A little stronger every day. There was an awkward pause, the kind that used to be filled with tension but now felt more like careful consideration. Listen, son. Your mother and we were wondering. We would like to take you and your brother out to dinner next week. To that steakhouse you like downtown. He paused again and then added, his voice almost shy. Our treat, of course. It's about damn time we paid. A real, genuine smile spread across my face. Felt unfamiliar and wonderful. I'd like that, Dad, I said. I'd like that a lot. It was a small step, a single dinner, but it was a step onto a new path, a path that led toward a place that looked, for the first time, like home. It wouldn't be easy. There were years, decades of damage to undo, but for the first time it felt possible. For the first time, it felt like we might actually become a family again. Not the perfect, polished illusion my mother had always tried to project to the world, but a real one. Messy, flawed, scarred, but trying. And for now, that was more than enough. 1 year to the day after that disastrous Sunday afternoon, I found myself standing on the polished teak deck of a ship, the warm Mediterranean sun on my face and the clean, salty air filling my lungs. The Aegean Sea was a brilliant, impossible blue, and in the distance, the whitewashed villages of Santorini clung to the volcanic cliffs like a dusting of powdered sugar. It wasn't the Oceania cruise. That booking had been canceled long ago, the $30,000 deposit a sunk cost I now considered the best money I'd ever spent. This was a different trip. James and I had booked it ourselves 6 months ago. It was a smaller ship, less opulent, more intimate. We had spent the last week exploring the ancient ruins of Athens, getting lost in the winding streets of Mykonos, and talking. Really talking. We talked about our childhoods, not with anger, but with a new, shared understanding. We talked about our hopes for the future, for our careers, for our complicated, messy, healing family. We were sitting on the small balcony of our shared cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery, breathtaking strokes of orange, pink, and purple. You know, James said, swirling the ice in his glass of ouzo, I think this is the first vacation I've ever been on where I don't feel like I'm playing a part, where I don't feel like I have to be on. I knew exactly what he meant. There were no expectations here, no roles to fill. He wasn't the golden child, and I wasn't the outsider, the benefactor, or the problem. We were just two brothers, sharing a drink, watching a sunset. We were just Mark and James. Things are better, he said quietly, stating the obvious but needing to say it anyway. With Mom and Dad. That dinner a few months ago, it was actually nice. Less awkward than I expected. I nodded. It had been. We hadn't rehashed the past. That was for Dr. Evans's office. Instead, we talked about Dad's new, doctor-approved exercise regimen. We talked about Mom's new obsession with gardening, how she was waging a war against the rabbits eating her petunias. We talked about a funny movie James had seen. It was tentative, fragile, but it was real. They were trying. They were still in therapy. They were learning to listen more than they spoke. They were learning to ask questions. Dad called me last week, I said, a small smile playing on my lips, just to ask about a new client I'd signed. He asked about the marketing strategy, about the target demographic. He actually sounded interested. James grinned. That's nothing. He told me he bragged to his cardiologist that his son was a marketing genius. We both laughed, a real, easy laugh that carried out over the water. It was such a small thing, a throwaway comment. But it was everything. The approval I had chased my entire life, the validation I had been willing to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, was finally being given to me, freely and honestly, now that I no longer needed it to feel whole. My worth wasn't tied to their opinion of me anymore. It was something I had forged myself in the fire of that confrontation. It was a quiet, steady confidence that came from knowing I had done the right thing, from standing up for myself, from choosing my own well-being over their comfort. The ultimate irony was that by finally, fully accepting my role as the outsider, I had inadvertently created a path for myself to get back in, but this time it was through a door I had built with a key that I held. The family I had now was one being rebuilt on a new foundation of honesty and respect, not on the rotten timbers of obligation and resentment. I looked out at the endless, darkening horizon, the first stars beginning to prick the velvet sky. The peace I felt was deep and profound. It was a peace that came from setting boundaries. It was a peace that came from forgiveness, not just for them but for myself, for taking so long to find my voice. And it was a peace that came from understanding that true family isn't about blood or obligation or keeping score. It's about love, respect, and showing up for each other, not just with your wallet, but with your whole, authentic, messy heart. The acceptance I had craved my entire life hadn't come from them. It had come from within. What a brilliantly satisfying end to a completely chaotic family drama. Waffle Gang. I am absolutely thrilled with how OP handled this. Walking away and refusing to be the family ATM was the catalyst for actual, genuine change. I love that James woke up, realized he was complicit, and actually fought alongside his brother. The parents having to literally face their own bankruptcy and the dad having a near-death experience before dropping his ego is wild, but it forced them to look in the mirror. Therapy actually working for once? We love to see it. It's so rare in these Reddit stories that toxic parents actually humble themselves, apologize sincerely, and try to rebuild. Mark found his self-worth, got his brother back, and didn't have to sacrifice his sanity anymore. That $30,000 lost deposit was the best investment he ever made in his own mental health. But I want to hear from you guys. If you were Mark, would you have canceled the cruise right in front of them? Do you think the parents truly changed? Or is it just because they got old and sick? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below because I read every single one. And just a huge thank you for being here today, getting involved in the stories. Your love, your support, your time. It always means the absolute world to me. Take care, stay cheeky, and much love.